Kevin,
Hi.
thank you for doing this.
Of course. Happy to be here.
I love that you're spending time with me in San Francisco. I feel like this is a place where you don't spend as much time anymore. Your offices are no longer, you're distributed.
Yes,
right?
we're fully remote. So
Yeah. New World Order.
yes, new world order coming out of COVID. It's
Yeah.
the new life that we all live. So,
Yeah, I like it. I think when we think about legal practice and we think about in-house too, right? There's this like sense of, so when I was in-house, they would never want me in the office because they're like, the lawyer, why is he here? Do you feel like you're welcome into conversations a little bit more now that you're remote? Because there's no other way to be present, right?
Yeah, to be honest, like I've always felt welcome in all the
Yeah.
places I've worked, which is nice, and I think that's a testament to the companies I've worked for and the people I've worked with. And so, but I understand the sentiment, and I think it's a lot easier to be connected, these days, like through Zoom, through whatever, services you might have, and so, or Slack, right? And so that is true. I think the technology in the world we live in allows you to be present at times, so long as you're doing it intentionally, right?
Yeah.
And I think there is ways to be, you can lapse into, unintentional disconnection, right? But I think in this world, you have to be very intentional about building those relationships with the business, right? And then I think if you do that, you'll be welcomed into the room.
Yeah. You see, so I've understood this about you immediately, is you see legal as a service organization. You understand that if legal doesn't have conviction and design around like how it builds itself up and how it connects with the business, like it's not, you're going to let the business kind of instruct you on it. And like I feel like you've had that design thought kind of going in. So early days, MasterClass, and as you're kind of thinking about, what does this business need, right, from the legal function? How did you get there? How did you start building that like requirements list of you are here and I want to take you there?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like I think I see legal as a service, business, right? It is in service of pushing the business forward. What that business might be, whether it's revenue driver or product growth or launching new features. Like legal is here to enable the business, right?
Yeah.
Look, we operate in a world that's not necessarily highly regulated. Like MasterClass is a consumer company, but we're not fintech. We're not we don't deal with government contracts or whatnot. So we do have the luxury of leaning in a lot more. And I always view business or legal as being a enabler, right? And so we're not trying to say no to the business, right? We're trying to find solutions. And so I think when thinking about building the legal team, like that's primarily my goal, right? So whether it's our legal tech stack or the people I hire, right? I want to make sure that it empowers the legal team to be able to be that business partner to the sales team, to the product team, to the marketing team, right? And so I really think of it holistically across the board, right? It's not just the people, it's the legal tech stack, it's what we bring on, it's outside counsel, right? All of that stuff. So,
Is it thought about in your first days at MasterClass, you start building up those requirements and you say, okay, here's what I need in team, here's what I need in process or technology, and the way not just our philosophy, but our roadmap for execution, right? You got to that point and then you started looking at technology. Tell me about, how did you convert these requirements? Some that might be loose, some that are shifting into something concrete where you said, I have confidence, right, to go out and buy.
Yeah. I think what I do first is really think about the work streams, right? I identify the particular work streams that me and my team are responsible for and that we are trying to build and drive forward, right? And so from there, I think you can think through the requirements. And I think, 10 years ago, legal practice was very different, right? The legal tech stack was very limited, right? Very narrow. You may bring on a CLM, right? You make sure you buy Word, right? You should make sure you have a cloud provider, right? But these days it's completely different, right? It's widespread, like in terms of the legal tech, it's everywhere. And so I think it's important, to really think about like the particular work streams that you're trying to improve with the technology, stack that you bring on, right? There are some work streams that you might identify and you'd be like, look, does it make sense to insert legal tech in this space to automate things? Maybe not, right? But I think again, with the widespread, development of where legal tech is now, there's vendors, there's tools, there's things you can bring on that can improve efficiencies across the board, right? And so kind of, honestly, the first step really is to think about and identify those work streams that you think can be improved with, bringing on a particular legal tech stack, right? And I think, outside of that stat, like again, 10 years ago, you didn't have to think about a lot of these things. Now, as a leader of a legal organization, or even as a general legal team member, you have to think about systems, you have to think about architecture, you have to think about the processes, that you're responsible for, right? And I think from there, then you can identify the needs of the company and the needs of the legal team to think about what technology solutions you can bring on. So, simple answer is like just think about the work streams you're working on and then think about how to improve efficiencies. It's kind of how I translated requirements into Page. So
yeah, I feel like the business expects this from you.
100%.
Yeah, they want you to be early adopter in technology, redesign things from the ground up.
Yeah.
I think as you build those requirements for your technology, how wide do you take those work streams or requirements, right? So I feel like CLM, super specific, what it does, how it does it. AI technology these days is a lot wider, right? So you could cover 80-90% of your work streams if you really wanted to. There are some challenges in doing it that way. So what have you learned as you built those requirements? How wide did you go on the work streams when you were thinking, I need tech, right? So did you start internal and then figure out what's in market? Or did you look at market and say, okay, how many work streams can I cover based on this?
Yeah, I do the former more than the latter, right? I start internal. I start thinking about the work streams. I start thinking about the things my team is responsible for, that I'm responsible for. And then from there, you kind of go to the market. You test to see what's out there. You see what things can improve those work streams that you've identified. So I really start from the inside and looking out. I do think that answer to that question has changed significantly, like I said, in the past 10 years, right? Like, before you can sit there and identify the work streams and be like, 80% of them probably don't need tech here. Like, I can just hire more. Hire another lawyer, hire somebody that specifically focuses on this, hire a paralegal that does that, right? I think now, I think it's, I wouldn't say irresponsible, but I would say it is, tantamount to think about how technology impacts all of your work streams. Because I do think it's true that, AI has changed the world to be able to, basically make yourself more productive, right? Mm-hmm. So I know, people talk about the 10x lawyer, right, using AI, and I don't know if it's 10x productivity, but I definitely think that there is increased productivity across the board that legal tech can bring to you and your team. And so I think it is tantamount now in this age to sit there and think about all your work streams and how it can be, increased in productivity, efficiency by bringing on technology. I don't know if it's full automation for all of your work streams. I do think there are some work streams that I was going to say never get there, but who knows with the pace of innovation the way it is now. But, I definitely think that all work streams are impacted, by the legal tech stack in this day and age. And I think you really need to think through how you can improve your efficiencies, your productivity for you and your team to augment your team, you know. So.
I think it's so challenging for a GC who's leading a legal organization, and then the stakes are so much higher when you're trying to canvas all these work streams, possibly. Yeah. And then you're trying to commit to a tech stack provider who's not, theoretically, maybe they're covering 20-30% in the first clip, right? So you've got a narrow set of use cases, you're running a pilot, you start shopping and you say, okay, who's gonna do that? But over time, you are buying into team, their roadmap, their perspective on market. There's so many things that you're now required to do as a technology purchaser that you haven't had to do before. So how, you made some choices, right, in your tech stack. Talk about how you came to find Ruli.
Yeah, I think, you focus primarily what you just said about team, right? I think that's one of the key differentiators, right? I think there's a lot of early companies out there in the legal tech space, right? And I mean, the way I thought about it, honestly, is twofold. One is in terms of scope, right? What does the product bring you, right? I think point solutions are great, but our legal team is small. We deal with, like I mentioned, like a wide breadth of topics, and things that we're working on. So I was really looking for a tool or technology, that would have a wide breadth of what it brings, right, in terms of product features and functionality. But I think the second element is also like what you mentioned in terms of team, right? I love working with early stage companies, right? Because they can build with you, right? They are more responsive to your feedback. They're more responsive to your particular needs for the business. They'll adapt and build with you because they're trying to build a plane as they fly, and I love that, And understand that there will be growth, concerns. There will be things that you encounter that you might not if you bring on a, NetSuite, right? It's very different. And so I think, as long as you're willing to deal with those kind of growing pains, I think it's great to work with early stage companies because they are so responsive. And when I met, Ruli and their team, like I thought I was sold because I thought that they were the team, the vision that they sold, the ability, the pace of innovation that they brought, I thought was great. I think, look, it's an evolving technology. It's, and I know where they're trying to build it in terms of the roadmap, in terms of what their vision of the overall aspect of what they're trying to do. And as long as you kind of believe in that team and you believe in their vision, I think it's great to bring on a company or bring on a product that you can grow with them. Because I think this is a very nascent space. You've mentioned before, like I think we're at the very, very early stages of where legal tech is and where it can be. And so I would rather grow with somebody than bring on somebody that thinks they solved it already, right?
Kevin, this is so fascinating, right? So like you and I are both lawyers. We were trained to run away from risk. And you just talked about early stage company, willing to be a design partner, really kind of thinking about your business and obviously understanding that they have accountability to the future of what Kevin is able to do at MasterClass. I want to focus in on the demo POC period, right? So at what point did you understand you've got a team who's willing to take your feedback? And this is part of your risk management, I would assume, right? Is you've got influence, but they see it as a partnership, and so do you. How do you start seeing that in the demo POC period? And how did you know it was Ruli and not one of the other providers?
Yeah, I think that element is a softer thing to test, right? I think the specifics of like you can put a red line into a tool, see how it responds, right? You can kind of measure the impact and measure the response of like, look, does it identify this issue correctly? Does it identify that issue correctly? Those are quantifiable, hard metrics you can look at. Your question is harder to measure, right? It's a soft metric. It's a thing that's like, how do you feel about the company? How do you feel about what they're selling you? When you identify an issue during the pilot, do they respond? Do they tell you, or do you not necessarily fix it, right? Because sometimes things that you tell them requires a longer period to fix, right? But do you feel like they're actually responsive and working on that problem? Have they identified it as being like, oh, your concern is important to me, and I do want to change the product in a way that is responsive to that, right? Or even if they disagree, right? They can disagree and be like, maybe that feature isn't right for what we're trying to build, but do they have a good reason for why they're doing that? Are they like, look, this is feature creep, right? It's great if I could build this, but I want to build the product to be this, right? And I thought, talking to the Ruli and the team, during the pilot period, they were incredibly responsive to the feedback, responsive to questions about their roadmap, questions or bugs that they identify, like all those things. And in addition to the quantifiable metrics about, does it look at the red line correctly? I thought all of those, really brought Ruli to the front. And so, I was happy to, after the pilot season, to, sign up for Ruli and, grow with them.
Yeah. I love that. I like this breakdown of hard requirements and soft requirements because, like you're saying, there's ways to sort of measure tangibly on some of them, but it's really hard otherwise. And so, like, I feel like during these pilot periods, there's a magic moment that happens. And so, whether it's you or your team, can you trace back to that period, right, and say hard requirements, magic moment, X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And then I also want to talk about the harder stuff, like you said, the softer side, right? To say, am I going to commit to this team, this long-term roadmap, right? So hard requirements, when was that moment?
Yeah. I think one of the moments that I felt, honestly, it's going to sound small, but it was like the use of the word plugin at Ruli, right? Yeah. Look, I think now, it's funny because, we brought on Ruli, I think 6 months ago at this point, right? And so the industry has changed so much already in 6 months. It's like, okay, Claude has a word plugin, right? Everybody has a word plugin. Right. But at the time, honestly, that felt like something very different, something unique about what they brought. ChatGPT didn't have a word plugin. Yep. Claude didn't have a word plugin then, right? And so really just seeing the ability for it to make pinpoint red lines, to go through, to identify issues, right? Present it in a way and propose red lines in a very specific, way as a lawyer would do, right? Instead of being like, look, I'm going to mark up the indemnity by deleting the whole thing and inserting your desired, clause. It actually went through, understood what the indemnity was doing, the proposed one, and what your, response would be, and then would be very specific about how it would redline it. And at that time, I thought it was that was the moment where it clicked, right?
Yeah.
Where it felt like this is something that could be useful for my team, which is a very small team.
Yeah.
And so, and it lives in the world that we lawyers live in, which is Word, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the kind of moment that I felt, a very tangible feeling that this was the right tool for us.
How wide did you go with your pilot? So your team, I assume, was using it or testing it. Were there other people within the organization that were starting to see what you were able to do with Ruli or any one of the other companies that you had tested? Walk me through what was most important on the hard requirements. Was it you're saying it was the Word plugin?
Yeah.
So was the workstream contracts? Was that the most important thing for MasterClass at the time?
At the time, it was like I mentioned about Ruli feeling like it was, what I mentioned about the desire for my full product feature, for full functionality, not just one specific point solution. So contracts was one element, but research was another element, right? I wanted to bring on a tool that was specific for our legal team, that was able to kind of work in the work streams that we deal with, and I think we were talking before about some of the edge cases about people asking questions about these things that you might not know about, and your CEO calls you being like, hey, I want to do this one thing, right? And so those questions are hard to sometimes figure out if a technology could help you with that, right?
Yeah.
So I thought research was another element that was incredibly important for us, right? Where it could provide us not necessarily 100% of the answers, but at least can guide you towards a way to think, right? The right questions to ask, right?
Yeah.
And so, so contracts as well as research were the two elements that I thought were the most important. In terms of audience, for the test, honestly, I was looking for a tool just for legal,
Yeah.
right? So really, I thought the primary audience that we tested it with was my legal team, and seeing if it could help improve their work streams and if it could improve what they did for the clients, right? And so we actually didn't test it with anybody else outside of legal because of this particular use case. We wanted it just for legal. So.
As you think about business cases, right, that you have to submit internally, and at the end of the day, it's your budget, it's your authority,
Right.
It's your accountability, but you do want to signal to the business, we're going to get contracts back faster. We've had 10 research projects that have come in this past month, quarter, and we're going to get those back to you with sufficient detail and with a level of responsiveness and maybe a little bit more availability of the legal team. How did you start thinking about that business case, right? So, you've had the advantage of 6 months, so give me maybe, demo POC period. I want to get from 24-hour response time to 12, right? How did you think about those hard requirements in the business case? And then how have those performed, right? Bring us to 6 months, bring us to current day, how those are going.
I think in terms of measuring the impact, right, I think you're absolutely right. Looking at time, turnarounds for contracts is one element, right? I think I'm actually a more of a believer. I don't know if my CFO would agree with me, but I think it's, I do feel the soft metrics are a little bit better than the hard tangible ones for us about turnaround times, bringing it down from 1 week to 24 hours or 24 hours to 12 hours. It's harder for me to quantify some of that stuff, right? Mainly because my CFO might disagree, but I think it's more of a feeling, right, with the company and with the legal team. I would say that demonstrably, I think it is faster, right? In terms of the legal tech tools that we've brought on for contract reviews. I certainly know from my personal experience, right, using Ruli it does improve my turnaround times, things that, would have taken me, 2 weeks or 1 week, has helped me reduce it to 1 day or even the same day, right? And so it is has markedly improved my kind of contract turnaround times. On the research part, I think I just feel more comfortable with being able to ask the right questions to my outside counsel using the research functionality, right? I'm a corporate lawyer by training. There's things that are outside of my wheelhouse that I've certainly gotten more comfortable with over the years, right? But there's certainly things that I don't know, and so I'm a person that will raise my hand if I don't know. And I try to push that on my team too. But I think Ruli has helped me at least get comfortable with those elements I don't know, so that I can go to the right experts or I can go to the right people and ask the right questions. And so, in that sense, again, I don't know if this answers your question about a demonstrable improvement, but I think, again, feeling-wise, I feel more prepared for conversations, and my team feels more armed with the knowledge and information when going into meetings with the business, and I think all of that is something that has helped us in our team. So.
Yep. As you, so you talked a little bit about the feeling side, right? So we go to the software requirements. Moving to the software requirements of why Ruli was going to be able to fit the bill, confidence seems like such an important aspect of a legal function, especially these days, right? So businesses are trying to move a lot faster. They're getting certainly a lot more creative to compete, that they kind of have to. Do you feel with Ruli, especially as you started that initial implementation period, that your team was actually taking on more because they felt more confident, right? So if you draw the circles of legal scope, what do we do today? And then what do we have to start doing for the business even as it changes? Is it wider, right? Is Ruli giving you a lot more surface area to attack?
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. I think it has given us more ability to tackle on more things, right? I think, I mentioned the 10x lawyer, right? I think AI tools help, improve the productivity of lawyers, right? I think outside of just the nature of legal tech itself or Ruli itself, it helps improve the efficiencies, right? In the sense of it allows them to, me and my team, to be able to focus on the more strategic things, right? The bigger ticket items, or however you want to call it, right? And so it eliminates, let's say, NDA reviews, as we were talking about before, right? It makes it quicker. So you're not spending time doing NDA reviews. You can use Ruli to help you kind of drive for the efficiencies. And so you're able to then dive deeper in with the product team on a new product launch, or you're able to work closely with the BD team on a more partnership agreement, right? It just allows the team to really focus on the things that are more strategic, right? And so versus the day-to-day kind of, grind and things that you might not necessarily want to spend time on, right? And so, look, we didn't go to law school to sit there, trying to organize your inbox, right? So I think, AI tools like Ruli have helped us remove some of those things, right? Or improve some of those things, and so that we can be strategic thinkers and thought leaders with our business, right? And so, and that's the reason why I hire good people and good lawyers, is because you want that expertise, you want that their desire to focus on those strategic deals and strategic, products and partners, right? And so, legal tools like Ruli have helped us do that, in that sense.
So, moving to implementations, AI tools move a lot faster. I feel like teams are a lot more engaged on these because it's changing the way we work in a way that allows us to multiply our outputs. Talk about the implementation process. How long did it take? Who was involved? When did you realize kind of the gates at which point you can stop, look, observe, and see, have we made it? And then when do we do the next thing, right? I'd love to hear about that.
Look, I think implementation was very easy. I view a successful implementation as one that doesn't necessarily need to involve my IT team every day, right? That doesn't need to involve me hiring consultants, right? You talk about CLMs, back in the day, you would have to hire on consultants to help you, bring on a CLM, right? To import all your documents, to import all your contracts, pull all the metadata out, right? I think these days, and Ruli is absolutely a testament to this, is that the implementation was extremely simple and easy and straightforward. It's usable out of the gate, right? And so now obviously the more context you give it, the more integrations you build onto it, the more powerful it becomes, right? Working to build playbooks with Ruli's tools, working to, upload precedent, right? Build out data, build out tables of data fields, right? All that stuff it gives it more power, but right out of the box, right? It's easy to use and simple, right? And it doesn't require much integration. It doesn't require much effort on my IT team, right? And so if I can implement it, I think then great, it's success, right? And I don't need to bring on an engineer. I don't need to bring on an IT team, right? If legal can do it, I consider it to be a great, a fit. So.